That night, Marcus stood in the pouring rain, watching the only door he'd ever called home slam shut in his face. His sister's words still echoed in his ears. "You're a burden. We can't carry you anymore." In that moment, soaked to the bone with nowhere to go, he understood a truth most people never face. When you have nothing, the world stops seeing you. You become invisible, a ghost among the living. But what Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know as he turned away from that house, was that this night, this very moment of complete devastation, would become the doorway to a life he never imagined. Because sometimes, the universe breaks you down completely before it can build you into who you were always meant to be. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Marcus Thompson was 32 years old when his world collapsed. For the past 8 years, he'd been living in his older sister Patricia's basement in a quiet suburb outside Richmond, Virginia. It wasn't the life he'd planned. Nobody plans to be dependent on family in their 30s, but life has a way of derailing even the most careful plans. It started with his mother's illness. Stage 4 cancer. Marcus had been working as an assistant manager at a local hardware store, finally building something for himself when the diagnosis came. Without hesitation, he quit his job to become her full-time caregiver. For 2 years, he dedicated every waking moment to making her comfortable, to giving her dignity in her final days. His savings disappeared into medical bills insurance wouldn't cover. His career opportunities evaporated. His friends drifted away, but he never regretted it. Not for a single moment. The day she passed, holding his hand and telling him she was proud of the man he'd become, was both the saddest and most meaningful day of his life. After the funeral, Patricia had offered him the basement. "Just until you get back on your feet," she'd said. Marcus accepted gratefully. He started applying for jobs immediately, but the economy was struggling, and his resume had a 2-year gap that required explanation. Months turned into a year. 1 year became 2. Patricia's husband, Robert, grew increasingly resentful. Marcus could feel it in the way Robert looked at him, in the sudden silences when he entered a room. He tried to contribute however he could. He cooked meals, cleaned the house, did repairs, looked after their children when they needed help. But it was never enough. In Robert's eyes, Marcus was a freeloader, a grown man who should have figured things out by now. The tension in the house became unbearable. Patricia, caught between her husband and her brother, grew distant. Marcus could see the strain in her face, hear it in her clipped responses. He knew he was causing problems in their marriage, but every job application came back with rejection. He was stuck in a nightmare he couldn't escape, watching himself become the very thing he'd always feared, a burden. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in late October. Marcus had just returned from another fruitless job interview when he found Patricia and Robert waiting for him in the living room. Their faces told him everything before they spoke a word. Robert didn't waste time on pleasantries. "This isn't working anymore, Marcus. You've been here 3 years. 3 years. Our kids are getting older. They need that space, and we need our privacy back." Patricia looked at her hands, unable to meet her brother's eyes. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. "I understand," he said quietly. "Just give me a few weeks to find something." But Robert shook his head. "No, we've been patient long enough. You need to leave. This weekend." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. This weekend, 4 days. Where was he supposed to go? He had $47 in his bank account, no car, and no friends close enough to impose on. He looked at his sister, silently pleading, but she just sat there, tears rolling down her cheeks, saying nothing. In that moment, Marcus realized he was completely alone. The next 3 days passed in a blur of desperate phone calls and dead ends. The one friend who might have helped had moved to Seattle. The homeless shelters were full, with waiting lists stretching weeks. Budget motels wanted a week's payment up front, money Marcus simply didn't have. By Saturday morning, he'd packed his meager belongings into 2 garbage bags and a worn backpack. Everything he owned in the world fit into 3 containers. The weight of that realization was crushing. Patricia gave him $80, avoiding eye contact as she pressed the bills into his hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Robert says—" She trailed off, unable to finish. Marcus hugged her, feeling her stiffen in his arms. "It's okay," he lied. "I'll be fine." But they both knew the truth. As he walked down the driveway, he heard the door close behind him with a finality that echoed in his bones. The lock clicked, and just like that, Marcus Thompson became homeless. The first night on the streets taught Marcus lessons he'd never forget. He found an alcove behind a closed bookstore where he could shelter from the wind. The temperature dropped into the 40s, and his thin jacket did nothing against the cold that seeped into his bones. He didn't sleep, couldn't sleep. Every sound made him jump. Every shadow could be a threat. As dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed to mock his misery, Marcus made a decision. He would not become another invisible homeless person. He would fight. He would survive. He would find a way back. That morning, with his last $20, he bought a disposable razor and shaving cream from a dollar store. He used the bathroom at a McDonald's to shave, wash up, and make himself as presentable as possible. If he was going to find work, he needed to look employable. The key was day labor. He'd heard about it. Places where contractors came looking for workers willing to do hard physical work for cash. No questions asked, no background checks, no long applications. He found a spot where men gathered at dawn, hoping to be chosen for a day's work. The first morning, nobody picked him. He looked too clean, too soft, not like someone who knew construction. The second morning, the same. By the third morning, Marcus was desperate. When a contractor's truck pulled up, he pushed forward aggressively. "I can work," he said, his voice hard with determination. "I'll work harder than anyone here. I need this." Something in his eyes must have convinced the foreman, a weathered man named Danny who'd clearly seen hard times himself. "You ever done roofing?" Marcus shook his head honestly. "No, but I learned fast, and I won't quit. I promise you that." Danny studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Get in the truck." That day, Marcus worked harder than he'd ever worked in his life. His hands blistered, his back screamed, the sun beat down mercilessly, and the rough shingles tore at his palms. But he didn't complain, didn't slow down, didn't ask for breaks the other workers took. By the end of the day, Danny handed him $75 in cash. "You did good," he said simply. "Come back tomorrow if you want more work." Marcus could have cried with relief. Over the next 2 months, Marcus became a regular on Danny's crew. The work was brutal, but it was honest, and it paid. He learned roofing, framing, drywall, basic electrical work. His body transformed, muscles developing from the constant physical labor. His hands grew calloused and tough. More importantly, he learned the rhythm of survival. He found a 24-hour laundromat where he could wash his clothes and sleep a few hours in the early morning, when nobody was around. He discovered which restaurants threw out perfectly good food at closing time. He learned which libraries had comfortable chairs and didn't chase homeless people away. He opened a new bank account and deposited every dollar he could spare, watching his balance slowly grow. $50, then $100, then $200. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was progress. But the nights were still cold, and the loneliness was overwhelming. Sometimes, lying in that laundromat at 3 a.m, Marcus would wonder if this was all his life would ever be. Hand to mouth, day to day, never more than a week away from complete destitution. Those were the dark thoughts that came in the night, the ones he had to fight off like physical demons. Everything changed on a Wednesday in early December. Danny's crew had been hired to do renovation work on a luxury property in the wealthy part of town. The house, if you could call it that, was more like a mansion. 20 rooms, marble floors, a chandelier in the entryway that probably cost more than most people's cars. The owner, they were told, was some kind of business executive who'd made a fortune in commercial real estate. Marcus tried not to think about the unfairness of it all as he carried materials through the pristine hallways. One person living in a house this size while he slept in laundromats. But he'd learned that bitterness was a luxury he couldn't afford. It consumed energy he needed for survival. Around noon, a black Mercedes pulled into the circular driveway. Marcus was on the front lawn, cleaning up debris, when the driver's door opened and a woman stepped out. She was probably in her late 40s, dressed in an expensive business suit, her dark hair pulled back in an elegant bun. But it wasn't her clothes or her car that caught Marcus's attention. It was the way she carried herself. There was a weight to her movements, a tiredness in her eyes that he recognized. He'd seen that look in the mirror often enough. She walked past him without a glance, as expected. In his work clothes, covered in dust and dirt, Marcus was invisible to people like her. But then something unexpected happened. She stopped at the front door, turned around, and looked at him directly. Not through him, not past him, but at him. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was refined but not cold. "Could you tell me where I might find the foreman?" Marcus straightened up, suddenly conscious of his appearance. "Danny's inside, ma'am. Second floor, master bedroom. They're working on the bathroom renovation." She nodded, studying his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You're new to this crew," she observed. It wasn't a question. "How can you tell?" Marcus asked before he could stop himself. A small smile touched her lips. "I notice things. It's part of my job. You hold yourself differently than the others." "You're working hard to prove something." Marcus didn't know what to say to that. She was right, but he wasn't used to being seen so clearly by strangers. "What's your name?" she asked. "Marcus Thompson, ma'am." "I'm Victoria Hayes. This is my house." She paused, still studying him with those sharp, tired eyes. "Are you hungry, Marcus Thompson?" The question surprised him so much, he answered honestly. "Always, ma'am." Victoria Hayes did something then that Marcus would replay in his mind 1,000 times afterward. She walked to her car, opened the back seat, and pulled out a large paper bag. "I had lunch brought to the site for the crew," she explained, walking back to him. "But I ordered extra. There are sandwiches, fruit, bottles of water. Make sure the men get fed, would you?" She handed him the bag, and as he took it, their eyes met. In that brief moment, Marcus had the strangest feeling that she saw everything. The nights in the laundromat, the desperate mornings at the day labor site, the quiet shame of accepting charity from a sister who no longer wanted him. It was impossible, of course. She was just being kind to the workers on her property. But something passed between them in that look. Something Marcus couldn't quite name. "Thank you, ma'am," he said quietly. She nodded and turned to go inside, but at the door, she paused. "Marcus," she said, not looking back. "Life has a way of testing us when we're at our lowest. But the test isn't whether we fall, it's whether we get back up." Then she went inside, leaving Marcus standing there with a bag of food and a strange feeling in his chest that his life had just shifted in some imperceptible way. 3 days later, Marcus was working on the Hayes property again when Victoria appeared in the doorway of the room he was painting. "Marcus, could I speak with you for a moment?" He set down his brush immediately, wiping his hands on his work pants. Danny shot him a curious look, but said nothing as Marcus followed Victoria out to the back patio. It was a cold December afternoon, but the patio was enclosed and heated. Victoria gestured to a chair. "Please, sit." Marcus hesitated. He was covered in paint and dust. The furniture looked expensive. "It's fine," Victoria said, reading his hesitation. "Sit, please." He sat on the edge of the chair, uncomfortable with this strange situation. Wealthy homeowners didn't have conversations with day laborers. Not like this. Victoria sat across from him, her expression serious. "I've been watching you work these past few days, Marcus. You're different from the others. More focused, more driven. Like you're running from something or toward something." "Which is it?" The direct question caught him off guard. "Both, I guess," he admitted. "I'm trying to build something from nothing, and I'm trying to leave behind the man I was when I had nothing." Victoria nodded slowly. "Where do you live, Marcus?" The question hit like a punch. He could lie, but something about her made him want to tell the truth. "Nowhere permanent right now. Ma'am, I'm between situations." Before we continue, if you're still watching and this story is touching your heart, type "I'm still here" in the comments. We love hearing from you, and it helps us know you're invested in Marcus's journey. "You're homeless." It wasn't a question. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, ma'am, for about 3 months now, but I'm working on changing that. I've saved almost $400. In a few more weeks, I'll have enough for a security deposit on a room somewhere." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus felt shame burn in his chest. He shouldn't have been honest. Now she'd see him as a charity case, or worse, as a potential problem. But when she spoke, her voice held no pity, only a strange kind of understanding. "I'm going to make you an offer, Marcus, and I want you to listen to the whole thing before you respond. Can you do that?" He nodded, confused and nervous. "I have a guest house. It's small, just a bedroom, bathroom, and a kitchenette, but it's warm and safe. It sits empty except when family visits, which isn't often. I'd like to offer it to you as temporary housing." Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but Victoria held up a hand. "I'm not finished. This isn't charity. In exchange for the guest house, I need help. My property is large, and managing it alone is becoming overwhelming. I need someone who can handle repairs, maintain the grounds, coordinate with contractors when needed. Someone I can trust to be here when I'm traveling for business. I'm offering you a job, Marcus, property manager and caretaker. The guest house comes with the position, along with a salary of $35,000 a year to start. There's health insurance after 90 days. Marcus stared at her, unable to process what he was hearing. It was too much, too good, too unreal. "Why?" he finally asked. "You don't know me. I could be anyone. I could be dangerous." Victoria's expression softened slightly. "I do know you, actually. After our conversation the other day, I did a background check. I know about your mother, about the years you spent caring for her. I know about your sister and her husband. I know you lost your job and your savings helping someone you loved. I also had my security consultant verify you're not dangerous and have no criminal record. You're just someone who got dealt a bad hand and is fighting like hell to play it anyway. That's exactly the kind of person I want working for me." She paused, her eyes distant for a moment. "I wasn't always wealthy, Marcus. 25 years ago, I was a single mother living in a studio apartment, working 3 jobs, wondering how I'd feed my daughter. Someone gave me a chance when I needed it most. A woman named Ruth Chen offered me an entry-level position at her real estate company when I had nothing but determination and a high school diploma. She saw something in me I didn't see in myself. I've spent the last 2 decades building an empire, but I never forgot that kindness. I never forgot what it means to be one bad break away from losing everything." Marcus felt something tight and painful in his throat. He'd been living in survival mode for so long, he'd forgotten what hope felt like. "I don't know what to say," he managed. "Say you'll take the job," Victoria replied simply. "Say you'll give yourself a chance to rebuild. Not for me, but for yourself. Because I see it in you, Marcus. That same hunger I had. That same refusal to stay down. You're not looking for a handout. You're looking for a hand up. I can give you that." Marcus thought about the laundromat, about the cold nights and the uncertain mornings. He thought about the slow accumulation of $400 that had felt like a mountain climbed one painful step at a time. He thought about his mother's last words. I'm proud of the man you've become." Could he accept this? Could he trust it? Or was this just another setup for disappointment? But looking into Victoria Hayes' eyes, he saw something that made his decision. He saw someone who understood. Not someone offering pity, but someone extending the same lifeline she'd once received. "When do I start?" he asked quietly. Victoria smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, the tiredness in her eyes seemed to lighten. "How about tomorrow?" The next morning, Marcus stood in the guest house, still unable to believe it was real. It was small, as Victoria had said, but to him it felt like a palace. The bedroom had a real bed with clean sheets. The bathroom had hot water and towels that smelled like lavender. The kitchenette had a refrigerator that Victoria had stocked with basic groceries. There was even a small television and a desk where he could pay bills and manage the property paperwork. He sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time in 3 months, he allowed himself to cry. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming relief. He had a home. He had a job. He had a chance. That first week was an adjustment. Victoria was particular about how she wanted things done, but she was also patient and clear with her instructions. She showed him the property maintenance schedule, introduced him to the regular contractors and service providers, explained her security system and how to manage visitors. Marcus absorbed everything like a sponge, determined to prove he deserved this opportunity. He woke early and stayed late, learning every inch of the property. He fixed a leaking sprinkler system, repaired a fence section damaged in a storm, organized the cluttered garage, and set up a detailed maintenance log. He wanted Victoria to know she hadn't made a mistake, but it wasn't all easy. There were moments when the old fears came back. Late at night, he'd wake up in a panic, convinced this was all a dream, and he'd wake up in the laundromat again. Sometimes, when Victoria was traveling for business, the guest house felt too quiet, too good to be true, and he'd find himself waiting for the other shoe to drop. The hardest part was the isolation. He saw Victoria only occasionally, when she was home between business trips. The rest of the time, he was alone on the property, maintaining a world he didn't quite feel he belonged in. He missed the camaraderie of Danny's crew, the rough jokes and shared struggles. Here, he was a man between worlds. Not wealthy enough to be Victoria's equal, but no longer homeless and desperate. He existed in a strange limbo, grateful but uncertain. 3 weeks into the job, Victoria returned from a business trip to Chicago and called him to the main house. Marcus's stomach dropped. This was it. She'd realized her mistake and was going to let him go. He'd known it was too good to last. But when he entered her study, Victoria was smiling. "Marcus, I wanted to review your first 3 weeks. I've been looking at the maintenance logs, and I'm impressed. The property looks better than it has in years. You've gone above and beyond what I expected." She paused. "But I've also noticed you eat dinner alone every night. That stops now. From now on, when I'm home, you'll join me for dinner. I eat at 7. I hate eating alone, and I suspect you do too." Marcus was taken aback. "Ma'am, I don't think that's necessary. I'm just the property manager." "You're the property manager who lives here," Victoria corrected. "And I'm a woman who has more money than she knows what to do with and no one to share a meal with. My daughter lives in Boston with her own family. My friends are all business associates who want something from me. You, Marcus Thompson, are the first person in years who doesn't look at me and see a bank account. You see a person. That's rare. So humor me. Have dinner with me." It became their routine. When Victoria was home, they'd have dinner together, and slowly, carefully, they began to share their stories. Marcus learned that Victoria's success had come at a cost. Her husband had left when their daughter was 8, unable to handle her ambition and work hours. She'd built her empire alone, sacrificing relationships and personal happiness for business achievement. Now, at 48, she was wealthy beyond measure, but profoundly lonely. She'd lost her daughter's trust years ago during a difficult teenage period when Victoria had been too focused on work to notice her struggling. They'd reconciled only recently, but the relationship remained strained. Victoria shared this without self-pity, just as statement of fact, but Marcus heard the regret in her voice. In turn, he told her about his mother, about the guilt he carried for not being able to save her, about his sister's betrayal that still stung in quiet moments. 4 months into Marcus's new life, everything nearly fell apart. It started when Victoria's daughter, Emily, came for a visit. Emily was 24, recently engaged, and planning a wedding. She arrived with her fiancé, a finance guy named Trevor who wore designer suits and talked about his portfolio. From the moment Emily saw Marcus, her suspicion was obvious. "So you're the new property manager," she said, her tone making the title sound like an insult. "How did you get this job exactly?" Marcus explained the circumstances truthfully, but Emily's eyes narrowed. That evening he heard raised voices from the main house. Emily's voice carried through the windows. "Mom, this is crazy. You let some homeless man live on your property? You have dinner with him? Do you know how this looks?" Victoria's response was too quiet for Marcus to hear, but Emily's anger was clear. "You're being taken advantage of. Can't you see that? He's probably planning to sue you or rob you or God knows what. You're too trusting, just like always." Marcus felt sick. He'd known this would happen eventually. He'd known people would question Victoria's judgment, would see him as a threat or a con artist. That night, he began packing his things. He'd leave in the morning before it caused more problems between Victoria and her daughter. But at dawn, there was a knock on his door. It was Victoria. "Don't you dare," she said, seeing the packed bags. "Don't you dare let my daughter's fear drive you away." "She's right to be concerned," Marcus said quietly. "I am a stranger you gave everything to. I'd question it too if I were her." Victoria shook her head firmly. "Emily sees threats everywhere because her father hurt her. He left us with nothing and took everything he could in the divorce. She's never forgiven him, and she's never trusted anyone since. But her fear doesn't get to dictate my decisions. You've earned your place here, Marcus. You've worked hard, been honest, and asked for nothing beyond what we agreed. That's more than I can say for most people in my life." She paused, her expression softening. "Stay, please. Let me handle my daughter." But Emily wasn't finished. Over the next 2 weeks, she made her mission to prove Marcus was untrustworthy. She checked the maintenance logs, looking for inconsistencies. She questioned contractors about him. She even hired a private investigator to dig deeper into his background. The investigator found nothing because there was nothing to find, but Emily's hostility made the atmosphere on the property unbearable. Marcus kept his head down and his mouth shut, but the stress was eating at him. Then everything came to a head in the most unexpected way. Marcus was working in the garden when he heard shouting from inside the house. Then a crash, then silence. He ran inside without thinking, following the sound to Victoria's study. Emily was on the floor, clutching her chest, her face pale and contorted with pain. Trevor was frozen, staring at his phone like he didn't know what to do. "Call 911, Marcus shouted, dropping to his knees beside Emily. He'd taken a CPR course years ago when his mother was sick. "Please let him remember. Please." Emily's eyes were wide with terror as Marcus checked her pulse. Fast and irregular. Heart attack. She was having a heart attack, and she was only 24 years old. "Emily, look at me," Marcus said firmly. "Stay with me. Help is coming." He started CPR, counting compressions, breathing for her, praying he was doing it right. Trevor finally got through to 911, his voice shaking as he gave the address. Victoria appeared in the doorway, her face white. "Oh God, Emily!" The next 15 minutes felt like hours. Marcus kept working, refusing to stop, refusing to let this young woman die in front of her mother. When the paramedics finally arrived, they took over immediately. But the lead paramedic looked at Marcus with respect. "You did good. You kept her alive." They rushed Emily to the hospital, and Marcus collapsed in the study, shaking with adrenaline and fear. Victoria knelt beside him, tears streaming down her face. "You saved her," she whispered. "My baby! You saved my baby!" At the hospital, they learned that Emily had an undiagnosed heart condition, a genetic abnormality that could have killed her at any moment. The doctors said Marcus's quick action had prevented brain damage and possibly death. The CPR had kept oxygen flowing until the professionals arrived. When Emily finally woke up, groggy but alive, the first thing she asked for was Marcus. He came to her hospital room reluctantly, expecting anger or resentment. Instead, Emily looked at him with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I judged you. I thought the worst. And you saved my life anyway." Marcus sat in the chair beside her bed. "You were protecting your mother. I understand that." Emily shook her head weakly. "No, I was being cruel because I was scared." "You didn't deserve that." She reached out her hand, and after a moment, Marcus took it. "Thank you," she said simply, "for not giving up on me." That moment became a turning point. Emily's recovery took months, but during that time she and Marcus developed an unlikely friendship. She saw the man her mother had seen all along, someone genuine and kind who'd been dealt an unfair hand. She apologized to Victoria for her behavior and to Marcus for her suspicions. More importantly, she began to heal the rift with her mother, finally understanding that Victoria's judgment in people was better than she'd given her credit for. Trevor, embarrassed by his own paralysis during the crisis, broke off the engagement. Emily, still recovering, realized she'd been trying to build a life with someone who couldn't handle adversity. "I need someone who shows up in the hard times," she told Marcus one afternoon as they sat on the patio. "Like you did, like my mom has tried to do. I've wasted too much time on people who only stick around when life is easy." Marcus thought about his sister, about fair-weather relationships and the people who vanished when he needed them. "You'll find your person," he said. "Someone who sees your value and doesn't run when things get hard. They're rare, but they exist." A year after Marcus first moved into the guest house, his life had transformed in ways he couldn't have imagined. The property manager job had evolved naturally into something more. Victoria began including him in business discussions, valuing his perspective. She discovered that Marcus had a natural head for numbers and problem-solving, skills that had gone unused during his years of struggle. When one of her commercial properties needed renovation oversight, she asked Marcus to manage it. He coordinated contractors, stayed on budget, and delivered the project early. Victoria was impressed. "You're wasting your talents doing maintenance," she told him. "I want to train you in property management, real property management, for my commercial holdings. Would you be interested?" Would he be interested? Marcus had spent so many years just trying to survive, he'd forgotten he could actually build a career. Victoria enrolled him in online courses in business management, real estate law, and commercial property management. She paid for everything and gave him time during work hours to study. Marcus attacked the courses with the same intensity he'd brought to roofing work, and his grades reflected his dedication. Straight A's, Dean's List. He'd forgotten how much he loved learning, how good it felt to challenge his mind instead of just his body. By year 2, Marcus was managing 3 of Victoria's commercial properties. He had business cards, a company email, and people who called him Mr. Thompson with respect in their voices. He'd moved from the guest house into a small apartment in the city, wanting to prove to himself he could maintain independence. But he and Victoria remained close, having dinner together once a week to discuss business and life. He'd also reconnected with his sister Patricia. The initial conversation had been painful, with accusations and hurt feelings on both sides, but gradually they'd begun to rebuild their relationship. Patricia admitted she'd been ashamed of how she'd treated him, that Robert had pressured her, but she should have stood up for her brother. Marcus forgave her, understanding that fear and financial stress had driven her actions. They'd never be as close as they once were, but they were family, and that meant something. The real transformation, though, was internal. Marcus no longer woke up in a panic, no longer felt one bad day away from disaster. He'd built savings, established credit, created a life with foundation and purpose. He'd gone from invisible to valuable, from burden to asset. But more importantly, he'd discovered something about himself. Resilience was built in the valley, not on the mountaintop. His time on the streets, as painful as it had been, had taught him what truly mattered. Dignity didn't come from circumstances. Dignity came from how you responded to circumstances. One evening, over dinner at Victoria's house, she surprised him with an announcement. "I'm opening a nonprofit," she said. "A foundation dedicated to helping people transition from homelessness to employment. Job training, temporary housing, mental health support, all of it. And I want you to run it." Marcus stared at her, speechless. "Run it?" "Victoria, I'm not qualified to run a nonprofit. I've barely managed to run my own life." Victoria smiled. "You're the most qualified person I know. You've lived it, Marcus. You understand what people need because you've needed it yourself. The business side we can teach you, the heart and the wisdom, that comes from experience. And you have that in abundance." The foundation launched 6 months later. Marcus poured himself into it, designing programs based on what he'd needed during his darkest days. Not handouts, but opportunities. Not pity, but respect. Job training that led to actual employment. Temporary housing with dignity and privacy. Mental health counseling to address the trauma of homelessness. Partner businesses willing to give people a second chance. In the first year, the foundation helped 73 people transition off the streets. 73 people who'd been invisible became visible. 73 people got the hand up Marcus had received. Each success story felt personal, like a piece of his own redemption. What Marcus didn't expect was falling in love. Her name was Sarah Chen, and she was Ruth Chen's granddaughter. Ruth Chen, the woman who'd given Victoria her first chance all those years ago. Sarah was a social worker who volunteered with the foundation, running support groups for people transitioning from homelessness. She was 30 years old, with kind eyes and a laugh that made Marcus feel like the world was brighter. They'd worked together for months before Marcus realized what he was feeling. It started with small things. The way she listened to the foundation clients without judgment. The way she remembered everyone's names and their stories. The way she'd bring coffee for the staff on cold mornings, knowing exactly how everyone took theirs. The way she looked at Marcus, not seeing the homeless man he'd been, but the man he was becoming. He didn't think he had a chance. She had a master's degree, came from a good family, could have any man she wanted. Why would she be interested in someone with his history? But Sarah surprised him. After a particularly long day at the foundation, she asked him to get dinner. Just the two of them. Marcus's heart hammered in his chest. "Like a date?" he asked, hardly daring to hope. Sarah smiled. "Exactly like a date, if you're interested." Interested? Marcus felt like he could fly. That first dinner turned into many more. They talked for hours, discovering they shared the same values, the same sense of humor, the same belief that people deserved second chances. Sarah told him about her grandmother Ruth, who'd passed away 2 years earlier. "She used to tell me that, Sarah, the measure of a person isn't where they start or even where they end up. It's what they do with the journey in between. She'd have liked you, Marcus. She'd have been proud of what you're doing." Marcus felt a lump in his throat. "I wish I could have met her. I owe her everything. If she hadn't given Victoria that chance, Victoria never would have been in a position to give me mine. It's like a ripple effect of kindness." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. "That's exactly what it is. And now you're creating ripples for others. That's beautiful, Marcus." 6 months into dating, Marcus knew he wanted to spend his life with her. But the old fears resurfaced. What if she realized she could do better? What if his past caught up with him? What if he wasn't enough? Victoria, wise as always, saw his hesitation. "Marcus, you're self-sabotaging. I've watched you do it your entire relationship with Sarah. You think you don't deserve happiness, so you're waiting for it to be taken away. Stop waiting. Choose it. Choose her. She's already chosen you. Marcus proposed on a Saturday morning at the foundation. It wasn't fancy or elaborate. They were setting up for a job fair, and Sarah was arranging information tables when Marcus called her name. She turned around, and he was on one knee, holding a simple ring he'd saved for months to buy. Sarah Chen, you walked into my life when I was still figuring out who I wanted to be, and you saw me. Not my past, not my mistakes, just me. You made me believe I could be more than I thought possible. Will you marry me? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They married 6 months later in a small ceremony at Victoria's house. Emily was Sarah's maid of honor, a full-circle moment that made everyone emotional. Victoria walked Marcus down the aisle, the woman who'd saved his life, giving him away to the woman who'd taught him how to live again. In his vows, Marcus said, I promise to always choose you, in the easy times and the hard times, when life is kind and when it's cruel. Because you chose me when I was still putting myself back together, and I will spend the rest of my life being the man worthy of that choice. 3 years after his wedding, Marcus stood on a stage at a conference for nonprofit leaders, preparing to give a speech about the foundation's work. The room was filled with hundreds of people, all interested in their model for transitioning people from homelessness to employment. His hands shook slightly as he approached the microphone. Public speaking still terrified him, but then he looked into the audience and saw Victoria in the front row, beaming with pride. Beside her sat Sarah, their 6-month-old daughter Emma sleeping in her arms. And in the back row, he spotted Patricia, who'd driven 3 hours to be here. His family, the family that had abandoned him and the family he'd built. All together, all supporting him. Marcus took a breath and began. 7 years ago, I stood in the rain outside my sister's house, homeless and hopeless. I had $47, 2 garbage bags of clothes, and no idea how I was going to survive the night. If you'd told me then that I'd be here today, running a foundation that's helped over 300 people find their way out of homelessness, I would have said you were crazy. But here I am. And I'm here because one person stopped. One person saw me. One person offered a hand up instead of a handout. He told his story, not shying away from the painful parts. The nights in the laundromat, the desperation of day labor, the shame of being unwanted by his own family. But he also told the story of transformation, of Victoria's kindness, of hard work and second chances, of the ripple effect that started with Ruth Chen giving Victoria an opportunity and continued with Victoria giving him one. The foundation isn't about me, Marcus continued. It's about recognizing that homelessness isn't a character flaw. It's a circumstance, and circumstances can change when people have support, dignity, and opportunity. Every person we help is someone who was one bad break away from living on the streets. Sometimes that bad break is medical bills. Sometimes it's job loss. Sometimes it's family rejection, but they're all human beings who deserve a chance to rebuild. He talked about the programs they'd developed, the job training partnerships with local businesses, the transitional housing that treated people with respect, the mental health support that addressed the trauma of homelessness, the alumni network where people who'd gone through the program came back to mentor others. We measure our success not just in numbers but in stories, Marcus said. Like Robert, who came to us 2 years ago after losing everything in a divorce. Today he's a certified electrician with his own apartment and custody of his daughter. Like Maria, who was living in her car with her 3 kids. She's now a nurse's aide and just bought her first house. Like James, who'd been on the streets for 5 years and thought he'd die there. He's now our facility manager and one of our most dedicated staff members. The speech ended with thunderous applause, but Marcus barely heard it. He was thinking about that rainy night 7 years ago, about the man he'd been then and the man he was now. After the conference, Victoria approached him, her eyes shining. Your mother would be so proud, she said quietly. I'm proud. Marcus hugged her, this woman who'd seen potential in him when he couldn't see it himself. Thank you, he said. For everything. For the chance. For the faith. For never giving up on me. Victoria pulled back, looking him in the eye. You saved yourself, Marcus. I just opened the door. You're the one who walked through it and did the work. That night, lying in bed next to Sarah with Emma asleep in her crib, Marcus reflected on his journey. He thought about the moment he'd been thrown out, the moment he'd thought was the end of everything. But it hadn't been the end. It had been the beginning. Because sometimes the universe has to break you down completely before it can rebuild you into who you were always meant to be. Sometimes the door that closes behind you is the door that leads you to your destiny. And sometimes the person who saves your life is the one who sees you when the world has made you invisible. 5 years later, the foundation had expanded to 3 cities. Marcus and Sarah had 2 children now, Emma and their son David. Patricia had reconciled fully with Marcus and was a regular part of their lives, finally free from Robert, who she'd divorced 2 years earlier. Victoria, now in her 50s, had stepped back from day-to-day business operations and spent most of her time with the foundation and her grandchildren, Emily's twin daughters. The guest house where Marcus had first found shelter was now used as emergency housing for foundation clients, a full-circle moment that made everyone emotional. Emily ran the foundation's employment program, using her business degree and her own experience with crisis to help others. On the anniversary of the foundation's 7th year, they gathered for a celebration. Over 400 people had been helped by the programs. 400 lives changed. 400 people who'd been invisible were now thriving. Marcus stood to give a toast, looking around at the faces gathered there. Staff members, volunteers, alumni of the program, donors, family. 7 years ago, I learned that hitting bottom isn't the end. It's sometimes the beginning. I learned that one act of kindness can ripple through time and change countless lives. Ruth Chen helped Victoria. Victoria helped me. I help others. And those others will help the next person. That's the legacy we're building here. Not a foundation, but a movement of human beings refusing to let each other fall through the cracks. He raised his glass. To second chances. To the people who see us when we're invisible. To the ones who offer hands up instead of handouts, and to the understanding that we're all one bad break away from needing help. May we always be the person who stops, who sees, who offers that hand. The room erupted in applause and tears, because they all knew the truth. Every person in that room had either needed help or given it. They'd all been part of the ripple that started so many years ago with one woman's kindness to another. Marcus looked at Victoria, who smiled at him with pride and love. He looked at Sarah, holding their children, his future. He looked at Patricia, his past forgiven. And he thought about that rainy night 7 years ago when he'd lost everything. That night had been his salvation. Because sometimes you have to lose everything to find out who you really are. Sometimes you have to be broken to be rebuilt stronger. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is also the best thing. Marcus Thompson had been thrown out of a house, but he'd found a home, not in a place, but in purpose, in love, in the knowledge that one person's kindness could change the world, one life at a time. So here's my question for you. If you saw someone like Marcus today, invisible and struggling, would you stop? Would you be the person who sees potential instead of problems? Would you offer a hand up? Or would you walk past like most people do, assuming someone else will help? Think about it. Because we're all one bad day away from needing that kindness ourselves, and we're all one choice away from being the person who changes someone's life. What would you do? Let us know in the comments. And if this story touched you, if it made you think or feel or want to be better, share it. Because stories like this remind us that humanity isn't lost. It's just waiting to be awakened. One person, one choice, one moment of seeing someone the world has made invisible. That's all it takes to change everything. Thank you for watching. And remember, the next time you see someone struggling, you might be looking at someone's Marcus. Someone waiting for their Victoria. Someone one kind act away from transforming their entire life. Will you be the one who stops?